The entity that watches me sleep. Some people say that if you wake up at 3 a.m. for no reason, someone is watching you. I never used to believe that, until I met it. The first time I noticed it, it started with a feeling, that strange, skin-prickling sensation that someone is nearby, even when you're alone. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding without knowing why. At first I thought it was a bad dream. Sleep paralysis, anxiety, anything but reality. But then I saw the shadow, the figure in the corner. The first time I saw it, I had just woken up. The room was silent, my curtains drawn, my bedside clock flashing 3:12 a.m. That's when I noticed it. A shape. Standing in the darkest corner of my bedroom. Tall, too tall. Motionless. I couldn't see its face, just an outline, a dark silhouette against the shadows. I wanted to move, to sit up, to turn on the light, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't respond. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering to myself, "It's a dream. Just a dream." When I finally worked up the courage to look again, it was gone. Something was wrong with my camera. The next morning, I felt ridiculous. I told myself I was sleep-deprived, imagining things, but a sick curiosity lingered. That night, I set up my phone camera to record while I slept, just to prove to myself that nothing was there. When I checked the footage the next morning, my stomach dropped. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the screen flickered, and for a brief second, a shadow appeared at the foot of my bed. Then the video cut to static. I don't remember waking up, but in the next frame, at 3:15 a.m., I was sitting up, staring directly into the camera, eyes wide, unblinking, except I don't remember doing that. It knows I see it. From that night on, things got worse. Every night I woke up at exactly 3:07 a.m. Every night, the shadow was closer. At first it stayed in the corner. Then, by the second week, it was standing at the edge of my bed. Then, right beside me. One night as I lay frozen in terror, I saw something I will never forget. It smiled. No features, no eyes, just a wide, stretching grin filled with jagged, human-like teeth. And then it spoke, a voice like wind through dead leaves. "You see me now." My scream caught in my throat, because when it spoke, its voice was my own. No escape, I tried to leave my apartment. I booked a hotel, packed a bag, refused to sleep in that room again. But that night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, my heart racing, the room grew cold. And then, a whisper. "You can't run." I turned on the lamp so fast, I nearly knocked it over. Nothing was there. But when I checked my phone, the camera had recorded. And at exactly 3:07 a.m., the video showed me sleeping in my hotel bed. And the shadowy figure, it was already standing over me. A warning to you. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it chose me. But I know one thing. It's still here. And if you ever wake up for no reason in the middle of the night, don't look into the dark, because something might be looking back. The man in the photograph that moves. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but some pictures are worth 1,000 screams. The photograph, I first found the photograph at a flea market. It was buried in a dusty cardboard box, between stacks of yellowed books and old postcards. The black and white image showed a man in a dark suit, standing in front of an old farmhouse. His posture was stiff, his face emotionless, but his eyes? Even in the faded picture, his eyes looked sharp, alert, alive. The vendor, an old woman with shaking hands, hesitated when I picked it up. "You don't want that," she muttered. Her voice was low, almost fearful. "Why not?" I asked, holding up the frame, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Because he moves." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she didn't smile. She just shook her head and whispered, "Once you bring him home, he never leaves." I should have listened, but I didn't. The first time I noticed it at home, I placed the photograph on my bookshelf. It fit well with my collection of antique curiosities, old clocks, dusty globes, eerie paintings from unknown artists. That night, as I lay in bed, I had the strangest feeling, like someone was watching me. I turned toward the bookshelf where the photograph rested. The man in the picture was staring straight ahead, just like before, and yet, something felt different. I shook off the unease, blaming it on my imagination, and drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I froze. The man's head was tilted slightly to the side, like he had been studying me. The subtle changes, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe I had just never looked at it closely before. But over the next few days, the changes became impossible to ignore. At first, they were small. His head would shift. His hands, which were once clasped in front of him, were now at his sides. Then, his expression changed. That blank, emotionless stare, it was slowly twisting into something else. Something wrong. A smirk, faint but unmistakable. And the worst part, I started waking up every night at 3 a.m. And every night, the photograph was different. He's getting closer. One night, I moved the frame to the opposite side of the room, convinced I was just psyching myself out. The next morning, I nearly dropped my coffee cup. The photograph was back on my bookshelf. I hadn't touched it. But the man in the picture? He wasn't standing in front of the farmhouse anymore. He was closer to the foreground, like he had taken a step forward. I grabbed the frame, turned it over, searching for some kind of trick. Maybe it was a lenticular print, one of those images that changes when viewed from different angles. But no, it was just an old photo, except it wasn't, because it was changing by itself. The whispering part, I started hearing things at night. Soft whispers, too faint to understand, too close to ignore. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from my bookshelf. My body was frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Then something even worse, the sound of paper crinkling, like a photograph shifting inside its frame. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, turned on the flashlight, and shined it toward the bookshelf. The photograph was still there, but the man, he was no longer in the picture. He's here. I threw the frame in the trash. I left my apartment, booked a hotel, refused to go back for days. But no matter where I went, I kept waking up at 3 a.m., and every time, the photograph was there, waiting for me, the man inside, getting closer. One night, I finally snapped. I tore the photograph into pieces, burned them, watched them turn to ash. I thought it was over. But then the next morning, I received a package on my doorstep. No return address, no sender, just a single item inside. A photograph, the same man, standing right behind me. A warning, I don't know if he'll ever stop. I don't know what he wants. But if you ever see an old photograph of a man in a dark suit, do not take it home, because once you do, he will come for you too. The screaming woman in the abandoned hospital. They say some places are never truly empty. Some places hold on to pain, fear, and suffering, trapping the souls of those who were never meant to leave. And if you listen closely, sometimes you can still hear them. The dare it all started as a stupid dare. My friends and I had always been into urban exploration, breaking into abandoned buildings, taking photos, and posting them online for the thrill. We'd explored old factories, empty mansions, even underground tunnels. But nothing compared to St. Mary's Asylum. It had been abandoned for nearly 50 years, left to rot on the outskirts of town. A place whispered about in hushed voices. A place where patients screamed until their last breath, and one of those screams never stopped. The legend of the screaming woman. The legend was simple. Decades ago, a woman was brought to St. Mary's after suffering a mental breakdown. No one knew her real name. She had no family, no records. She was just patient 99. The doctors claimed she would scream every night, a blood-curdling, gut-wrenching wail that echoed through the hospital halls. Nurses covered their ears. Patients rocked in their beds, whispering prayers. And then, one night, she vanished. No one knew how. Her room was locked from the outside, her restraints untouched, but she was gone. All that remained was the sound of her screams, still heard echoing through the empty halls long after St. Mary's shut down. Breaking in. We arrived at midnight. The hospital loomed over us, its broken windows like empty eye sockets. The air smelled of mildew, decay, and something else, something rotten. We slipped inside through a broken doorway, our footsteps echoing in the vast empty halls. Creepy as hell, my friend Jake muttered, sweeping his flashlight across the peeling walls. The hospital was dead silent. But I swear, the moment I stepped inside, I felt watched, like the shadows themselves were breathing. The first scream in. We wandered the upper floors, taking photos, laughing nervously, but the deeper we went, the stronger the feeling of unease. Then at exactly 3 a.m., we heard it. A scream. Not just any scream. A piercing, tortured shriek that rattled the walls and sent ice through my veins. We froze. The sound was coming from the basement, where patient 99 was last seen. The descent I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But Jake, grinning like an idiot, whispered, "We have to check it out." And against every ounce of reason, we did. The stairs creaked beneath our weight as we descended into the darkness. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something rotting. Then the scream came again, closer, louder. It didn't sound human. The room. At the end of the hallway stood a door. Heavy, rusted, marked with deep claw-like scratches. My heart pounded as I reached for the handle, and then it swung open on its own. Inside was a small, padded room. Empty, except for the bed. The strap still hung loosely. The mattress was torn open, as if something had clawed its way out. Jake stepped inside first. That was his mistake. She's still here. The door slammed shut. The air turned freezing cold. And then, in the corner of the room, something moved. A shape. A woman. Her back was to us, her body wrapped in a tattered hospital gown. Her head hung low, dark, matted hair covering her face. Jake whispered, "Hello?" The figure twitched. Then in the silence she laughed, a horrible wheezing sound that sent cold terror through my bones. Slowly she turned her head, and we saw her face. Her mouth was stretched wide, unnaturally so, like her scream had torn it open. Her eyes were hollow sockets, dripping with darkness. And then she screamed. The walls trembled, the room shook. Jake collapsed, clutching his head, his ears bleeding. The lights flickered, and the last thing I saw before the world went black was her crawling toward me. Aftermath: I woke up outside the hospital, alone. Jake was never found. The police searched the entire building. No signs of him, just an old hospital bed, still strapped with torn restraints. And on the wall, written in something dark and wet, "She never left." I still hear the screams at night, and sometimes, when I look into a mirror, I see her watching me.